There are two tales waiting for you, told one after the other by an odd set of two. So prepare yourself, dear one, because this is Drops of Darkness.
Hello, I'm Anodyne Vaughn, and welcome to our show, where each week we give you a new original dark fiction story, written and narrated by yours truly, accompanied by a thrilling, true paranormal experience, handpicked by my co-host and fellow narrator, Cameron Helkuik. For today's episode, I wanted to write something that felt close to home. Not my home, thankfully, but our main character's home, which wasn't as safe a place as she thought, especially at night. After that, Cameron has a true story submitted by one of our listeners about an entity that refused to be brushed off as a nightmare. If you enjoy what we do, it would help so much if you could share the show, give us a follow, and leave a review. Alright, enough of all that. Stranger and someone are waiting. I am Stranger, and I tell only fantasies. Whenever your world has a grip on your throat, I am there, waiting to unleash the monsters that sleep in my mind, so that they may remind you that you have sharp teeth and claws of your own. Opposites attract. It's so cliché, and I hate cliché sayings. Because they are, annoyingly often, so very true, giving you no other choice but to use them over and over because no one else has thought up another combination of words that conveys a thought that is as universally understood. And they really do. Unlike me, Thomas enjoys sunny days, saying hello to the neighbors, his brightly colored mugs with cheesy sayings, and he doesn't have nearly as many strong, meaningless opinions on things like cliches. Opposites attract. That's how I ended up here, I suppose. My home filled with mismatching throw pillows and a cabinet full of silly chipped mugs that now I'd probably save in a house fire for him. It's also how I ended up sitting in the living room at 3 o'clock in the morning, unable to sleep, staring at the freshly turned soil under our new garden. Unlike me, who's always had an on-again, off-again relationship with REM cycles, Thomas slept like the dead. Nothing could wake him up, aside from occasional threats of hypothetical violence, mostly letting him know where his alarm clock might get shoved to stifle the beeping. He'd always been that way. But the sleepwalking, that was new. I stay up late pretty often. I do my best work when I know I should be sleeping, but lately I haven't been working at all, or reading, or rewatching shows, or any of the other things that I used to do to pass these late hours. You know, I didn't hear a thing the first night. Not a single creak of a floorboard, or the heavy thud of the front door's deadbolt unlocking. But there he was, when I happened to glance up from my book and out the window. With bare feet and his eyes closed, Thomas stood in the middle of the street, facing our house. He didn't move when a pair of headlights shined on him, or when the sound of the car's engine got louder as it sped down our street. Jesus fuck, do they not see him? I undid the deadbolt on the front door. How is it still locked? Did he go out back? How long has he been out there? God, he's freezing. Why are they not slowing down? I barely got my hands around his arm and was ready to drag him back inside when he went from standing completely still into a full-on sprint towards the house. I'd left the door wide open in my rush to get to him, and within a few seconds, I was alone in the road, and he was disappearing into the darkness of our unlit entryway. I was still wondering what the fuck just happened when the car's bumper came to a stop less than a foot from where I was standing, for lack of better words, like a deer in headlights. I waved my arm at the driver and ran into my front yard, not knowing or caring what the less insane thing to do would have been. For the next 20 minutes, I sat on the edge of our bed, chewing the inside of my lip, and staring at Thomas as he snored and was splayed out like a starfish with an arm and a leg on my side of the bed. I touched his hand, and it was warm. The next morning, he swore he didn't remember a thing. He was grateful I was awake and able to get him out of the street. He gave me a kiss while pouring coffee into his favorite mug that said this might be whiskey on the side. And after turning it into a light shade of off-white with creamer, he resumed his bright and cheery morning routine. I was terrified, knowing it was purely chance, and that I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. Even if, thinking back, it did almost seem like he was waiting for me to see him out there. Not knowing how he got outside without me noticing kept me awake. And each night after, I found him in different parts of the house. At first, he would just be standing there, eyes closed, right outside whatever light came in through the windows. Anytime I tried ushering him back to bed, he bolted. And no matter how fast I made it up the stairs, he'd always beat me back to our room, where I'd find him, sound asleep, in some new arrangement of limbs, blankets, and pillows. Then on that night, I thought maybe it was the lack of sleep finally catching up with me. I'd hung a bell on our bedroom door, and even though I could tell Thomas wanted to tease me about it, he didn't. I planned on going to bed not too long after him. I just wanted to wait downstairs for a while to see if the bell worked. I thought maybe I dipped into a quick little nightmare when I dozed off in the chair by the front door. Maybe. Probably not. But still, maybe was better. Because if what startled me awake was not a product of an overtired mind, then there was something wrong with Thomas. He was bent down in front of the chair. His face was only a few inches away from mine, leaning into the light streaming in from the hall as if to show me something. The skin stretched over his face had no give. No smile lines around his nose and mouth. There were no wrinkles in the corners of his eyes. No red hairs mixed into his brown beard. And his eyes weren't just black. They were nothing. Twin pockets of void staring back at me, waiting for me to react. I don't think I'd ever screamed like that before. I didn't even know I could scream like that. Upstairs, I heard booming footsteps and the bell jingle as our doors swung open. I didn't realize how loud the real Thomas was as he ran down the stairs. It seems so silly now that I hadn't noticed before how quiet and how poor a copy this thing was. Or it had been. Thomas stared at the intruder, and in the brief moment it took for him to recover from the surprise, their faces had the same creases. Their beards had the same stray gray under their lip, and two honey brown eyes filled the black pits. It happened so fast. Thomas pinned the other one underneath him and held him down long enough so I could run into the kitchen and grab the biggest knife I could find. I'd just pulled the cleaver out of its slot on the knife block when I heard something break in the living room. When I came back, the mug that had been left on the coffee table was shattered. I could see the shard Thomas held in his hand. Under the blood were the words, "might be." He dropped it to the floor, where it joined the pieces that read "this" and "whiskey." I find myself wondering if Thomas was really capable of stabbing someone in the neck like that, or to be able to bury a body that looked just like him in the backyard before morning. But he's always liked flowers, so the garden we planted over it makes sense. And it was just a stupid mug. No one would think twice about breaking their favorite mug when there's an intruder in the house. And that was a traumatic event. Of course he wouldn't be his normal cheery self after. Tomorrow morning he'll stir his coffee, and I'll wonder about how dark he takes it now. He'll kiss me on the cheek and touch my hand and ask if everything's okay. His fingers will be cold, but I'll say yes, and I might even believe it. Love is blind after all.
Hello, everyone. In between stories, we like to highlight a cause that is worth our collective attention. For April, in Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we decided to highlight the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. The NSVRC enables advocates to combat sexual harassment, assault, and abuse by giving them the research and tools they need. They recognize that putting an end to sexual violence goes hand in hand with stopping racism, sexism, and every other type of oppression. You can find out more and donate at www.nsvrc.org or through the link on our website at dropsofdarkness.com. Now, back into the shadows we go. I am someone, and I tell only truth. Whenever something slithers through the barrier between worlds, I am there. Not to stop them, but to watch them and remind you of the countless terrors your kind has survived, all on their own. I feel like I would have been a hardcore skeptic if I haven't had so many things happen to me throughout my life. Because even after over 30 years of seeing, hearing, and feeling things around me that should not be there, my first instinct when some fresh, horrible thing introduces itself in the middle of the night is to chalk it up to something, anything else, no matter how far-fetched that explanation might be. Every time I think, it was just a dream, I know I can still see the scratch marks, teeth marks, still see them by the door, even though I know I'm awake, but it's probably nothing. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The other night was one of the times it didn't work. And believe me, I tried, and am actually still trying to convince myself this didn't really happen. I'm a light sleeper, so I woke up pretty quickly after I felt a weight shifting on my partner's side of the bed. I didn't think much of it, figuring he was just getting up to pee. So I kept my eyes closed and tried to fall back to sleep. But it didn't stop. And instead of the usual single push-off that you'd feel from someone getting up, it was a consistent rocking. I opened my eyes, confused because it felt like someone was standing on the bed, either trying to keep their balance or just swaying. He hadn't gotten up to pee. He was still sleeping next to me, while this woman stood on our bed, leaning over him with her two large feet shoved against his sides. She was bent at the waist at a 90-degree angle, with her legs and back perfectly straight. Her head was far too big compared to the rest of her, and I could only see part of my partner's face through the long, stringy hair that hung off her patchy scalp. She was wearing a thin, vintage-looking nightdress, and from the dim light from the clock on the nightstand shining through it, I could easily see her thin, bony body. I jerked away from her in surprise, and half stumbled, half fell out of the tangle of blankets I sleep with. When I stood up after less than 2 seconds of fumbling around on the floor by our bed, she was gone. My heart was still pounding, but that had to have just been a dream. So, since I was up already, I went to the bathroom, got a drink of water, and then climbed back into bed. I even looked at my phone for a while to try to burn out the image of the woman from my brain before going back to sleep. After about an hour of watching reels, I shut my eyes, only to feel a weight shifting back and forth again from the other side of the bed. This time, when I looked, she was still bent over my partner, but her face was turned towards me. Even though her head was easily twice the size it should have been for her body, the features of her face were tiny. Her 2 black pinhead eyes watched me, while the small slit that was her mouth spread open with this huge gash filled with an insane amount of tiny little stubs of teeth. You know, the little front teeth that cats have? That's what these looked like, only terrifying instead of cute. She moved slowly, which somehow made it even creepier. It was like she knew she didn't have to try hard to catch me as I tried to push myself back onto the floor. She reached out, and after I put my arm across my face to try to block her hand, she gently wrapped her abnormally long fingers around it and brought it to her mouth. I felt with perfect, coherent, and conscious clarity the warmth of her breath on my forearm and the pressure of her little, stubby teeth as she touched them against my skin. She just opened her mouth and closed it again, over and over, but she never truly bit down. It felt like she was just wanted to let me know that she could. Finally, I managed to fall out of bed again, and she was gone. There was no shift between feeling asleep to feeling awake in between. I could still feel little patches of wet saliva from her teeth on my arm. If it'd just been the first round of seeing her, I could have easily brushed it off. But the second encounter is making it nearly impossible. I've seen a lot of things while awake, and I've had a lot of weird, terrifying dreams. After 3 decades, I hate how easily I can tell the difference between the two. She was not a dream. I have no idea what she is, but I think she wanted me to see her. And I hope I never find out why.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Drops of Darkness, which is written, voiced, and produced by Anodyne Vaughn and Cameron Helkuik. If you enjoyed your drift into the shadows, help keep the stories alive by sharing the show, leaving a review, and if you really want to earn the favor of these dark storytellers, tether yourself to their world by tapping subscribe. If you have a true paranormal story of your own that you'd like to be read by someone, you can make the offering to submissions@dropsofdarkness.com or through the form on our website. Until next time, dear one, and remember, when the darkness looks your way, hold its gaze.